Florian Maddox hit the ground hard, a sharp pain slicing through his leg as he tumbled down the rocky slope. The world spun around him, the dense Hawaiian jungle blurring as he landed with a sickening thud. His breath came out in harsh, ragged gasps. He tried to move, but a sharp jolt of pain shot through his ankle. Broken, or badly sprained at the very least. "Great," he muttered through clenched teeth, dragging himself up against a tree trunk. This was supposed to be a relaxing vacation 1 week away from the chaos of boardrooms, negotiations, and corporate takeovers. Now he was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and a useless leg. He pressed his head back, inhaling deeply. He'd survived worse. He just needed to figure out how to get back to the resort. A rustling noise made him tense. His first thought was a wild animal, but then a voice, soft, feminine, and uncertain, called out, "Are you okay?" Florian turned his head and saw her standing a few feet away, her brows furrowed in concern. She was dressed in hiking gear, her dark curls pulled into a loose ponytail, and her brown eyes scanning him with a mix of worry and curiosity. "I'm fine," he lied, trying to push himself up. His body disagreed, and he gritted his teeth as pain shot through his leg again. "Yeah, sure you are," she said, stepping closer. "You're bleeding and your ankle looks like it's swelling. You need help." Florian exhaled sharply, frustrated with himself. He wasn't the kind of man who relied on others, but unless he planned on crawling his way back, he didn't have a choice. "Fine," he muttered, "but I don't need a hospital. Just help me get back to my hotel." The woman sighed, kneeling beside him. "I don't think you're walking anywhere on that ankle, but I live nearby. My place is closer than the resort, and I can wrap it up until you're strong enough to leave." Florian hesitated. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially from strangers. But something about the determination in her eyes told him arguing would be pointless. She extended her hand. "Zara Sullivan." He took it, her grip surprisingly firm. "Florian, all right, Florian, let's get you out of here before it gets dark." With effort, she helped him up, letting him lean on her as they made their way through the dense jungle. Every step was agony, but she was surprisingly strong, taking most of his weight without complaint. "You do this often?" he asked, grimacing as they maneuvered over a fallen log. "Help injured tourists? Not exactly," she said with a small laugh. "But I know these trails well. I was heading home when I heard you fall." "Lucky me," he muttered. Zara glanced at him. "Actually, yeah, this area is dangerous at night. You could have been stuck out here for hours." Florian fell silent. The thought of spending the night in the jungle, injured, wasn't appealing. Maybe he really was lucky she'd found him. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small wooden cabin tucked between tall palm trees. It was simple but well kept, with a wide porch and soft light glowing from inside. "Sit here," Zara instructed, helping him onto a bench outside. She disappeared inside, returning moments later with a first aid kit and a bucket of water. Kneeling in front of him, she carefully removed his shoe, her fingers gentle but efficient. He inhaled sharply as she pressed around the swollen joint. "It doesn't feel broken, at least not obviously, but it's a bad sprain. I'm not a doctor, though. If the pain gets worse or the swelling doesn't go down, you'll need to get it checked properly. You need to stay off it for at least a few days." Florian groaned. "I don't have a few days." Zara raised an eyebrow. "You have somewhere urgent to be." He hesitated. If she knew who he was, Florian Maddox, CEO of Maddox Enterprises, one of the most powerful real estate firms in the country, she might treat him differently. And for some reason, he didn't want that. "Just a lot of work waiting for me," he said vaguely. Zara didn't press, simply wrapping his ankle with a firm but gentle touch. "Well, you're not getting anywhere tonight. You can stay here until you can walk." Florian sighed, frustrated but resigned. "Fine, but I don't want to be a burden." "Then don't be," she said with a teasing smile. "Just sit still and let me do my job." For the first time since the accident, Florian let out a small, reluctant chuckle. Maybe this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. As Zara finished wrapping his ankle, he watched her, intrigued. She wasn't fawning over him like most people did when they knew his name. She was confident, capable, and completely uninterested in whatever wealth or power he held. It was refreshing, and for the first time in years, Florian Maddox felt something unexpected. curiosity. Florian leaned back against the couch, adjusting his injured ankle on the makeshift ottoman Zara had dragged over. The small cabin was modest, but there was warmth to it, a lived-in comfort that made him feel strangely at ease, despite the fact that he was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a complete stranger. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. Zara moved around the small kitchen with practiced ease, filling a pot with water before setting it on the stove. The quiet hum of the gas burner filled the space as she pulled out a few ingredients from a wooden cabinet. "You don't have to cook for me," Florian said, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and reluctance. He wasn't used to being taken care of. Zara shot him a pointed look over her shoulder. "You need to eat, and I doubt you're in any condition to make something yourself." He exhaled through his nose, conceding the point. The painkillers she had given him earlier were starting to dull the throbbing in his ankle, but the exhaustion from the day was settling into his bones. As she chopped vegetables, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board filled the space. He took the opportunity to glance around. There were small touches everywhere: hand-woven blankets on the couch, a stack of books on a low wooden shelf, a half-finished painting propped up against the far wall. It was clear she lived here alone, but there was no sense of loneliness in the space. His gaze flicked back to her. "How long have you lived here?" Zara didn't pause in her work. "A little over 3 years. That's a long time to be out here by yourself." She arched a brow but didn't stop slicing. "Who said I was by myself?" Something unexpected flickered in his chest. He wasn't sure why the idea of her living with someone else unsettled him slightly. "So, you have family here?" "No," she said simply, scooping the chopped vegetables into the pot. "I meant that solitude doesn't mean loneliness. I like it here, the quiet, the space." "It's a choice, not a punishment." Florian studied her thoughtfully. He couldn't imagine choosing a life like this. His world was built on movement, power, and control. Silence wasn't something he embraced, it was something he filled with deals and decisions. "You don't ever miss the city?" he asked, shifting slightly to ease the pressure on his ankle. "I used to live in one," she admitted, stirring the pot, "but it never felt like home. Too much noise, too many expectations. Here I get to live life on my own terms." He understood that in a way. He'd built his career on control, ensuring that every aspect of his life was meticulously planned. But there was a difference: his world thrived on structure, while hers seemed to thrive on freedom. Zara turned and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "And what about you? What kind of life are you so eager to get back to?" Florian hesitated for a fraction of a second. He could give her the usual answer, the one people expected. That he had responsibilities, that his company needed him, that he didn't have time to sit around in a cabin waiting for an injury to heal. But for some reason, the words felt hollow in his mouth. Instead, he met her gaze and said, "One that doesn't have much room for mistakes." Zara studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then she nodded slightly. "Sounds exhausting." He let out a sharp breath that was almost a laugh. "Sometimes." Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something disarming about her. She didn't press, didn't pry. She simply accepted his words and moved on. After a few minutes, she ladled the steaming soup into a bowl and set it in front of him. "Eat." Florian picked up the spoon, taking a tentative sip. The broth was rich, the flavors balanced perfectly. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the warmth spread through him. "This is good," he admitted. Zara slid into the chair across from him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'd hope so. I cook for myself every day." He took another bite before glancing at her. "So, what do you do out here when you're not rescuing injured tourists?" She shrugged. "A little bit of everything. I guide hiking tours when I feel like it, paint when inspiration strikes, and help out at the village market when they need an extra hand." He frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound very structured." "It's not," she said easily. "That's the point." Florian considered that as he ate. His entire life had been built on precision, on schedules, deadlines, and expectations. The idea of living without a carefully planned map was foreign to him. As he finished his meal, Zara stood and took his bowl, rinsing it in the small sink. "You should get some rest," she said. "Your body needs time to heal." He didn't argue. The exhaustion was catching up to him, the combination of pain and the unfamiliar stillness pulling him under. Zara grabbed a folded blanket from a nearby chair and handed it to him. "There's an extra pillow on the couch. It's not a 5-star hotel, but it's comfortable." Florian accepted the blanket, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. The contact was fleeting, but it left a strange awareness in its wake. As she turned to head toward her own room, he found himself saying, "Thank you." She paused in the doorway, glancing back at him. "For what?" "For not asking too many questions." Zara tilted her head slightly, considering him. Then with a small smile, she said, "Not everything needs an explanation, Florian." With that, she disappeared into her room, leaving him alone in the quiet cabin. Florian lay back against the couch, staring at the wooden ceiling. He was used to people wanting something from him: his time, his money, his influence. But Zara hadn't asked for anything. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like Florian Maddox, CEO. He just felt like a man. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the cabin's wooden floor. Florian stirred, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. His body ached, but the pain in his ankle had dulled to a manageable throb. He pushed himself upright, adjusting to the unfamiliar stillness. Zara was at the small dining table, her hair loosely tied back, a steaming mug in front of her. She glanced up as he shifted on the couch. "You survived the night," she said, pushing a second cup toward him. Florian reached for it, the warmth grounding him. "Barely." Zara watched him take a sip, her expression unreadable. "I need to head into the village for supplies. You should stay off that ankle." He wasn't used to being told what to do, but there was no arguing with the logic. "How far is the village?" "Close enough," she said, slipping on a pair of sandals. "It's a small market, but they'll have what I need." Florian set his cup down. "I'll come with you," she raised an eyebrow. "You can't even stand properly." "I'll manage." She studied him for a moment before shaking her head. "You don't like sitting still, do you?" "I don't have much practice at it." Zara sighed but didn't argue further. She disappeared into the other room and returned with a sturdy wooden cane. "Use this, and if you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind." Florian took it, testing his weight. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than relying on her entirely. The sun was already high, the heat pressing against them as they stepped onto the narrow dirt path leading away from the cabin. The air smelled of salt and fruit, and the distant sound of the ocean hummed in the background. Florian moved carefully, his steps deliberate. Zara walked beside him, her pace unhurried. "You don't get many visitors out here, do you?" he asked, watching as birds scattered from the trees. "Not often," she admitted. "People prefer the resorts. And you prefer the quiet." She glanced at him, the corners of her mouth curving slightly. "You're catching on." The village came into view, a collection of small stalls lining the main road, their colorful awnings fluttering in the breeze. Vendors called out greetings, and Zara responded with an easy familiarity. She led him to a stall where an older woman with silver-streaked hair was arranging fresh produce. The vendor's sharp eyes swept over him before settling on Zara. "You brought company," the woman noted, handing Zara a woven basket. "He's recovering from an injury," Zara explained. The woman nodded knowingly. "Men always think they can walk off a broken bone." Florian exhaled through his nose, not rising to the bait. Zara selected a few items, her movements efficient. As she bartered with another vendor, Florian took in the surroundings. The market was small, but it pulsed with life, a stark contrast to the sterile, high-end stores he was accustomed to. A few villagers eyed him curiously, but no one approached. He wasn't used to being ignored. In his world, people fawned, schemed, or calculated their approach. Here, he was just another stranger passing through. Zara returned, basket in hand. "Ready," he nodded, and they started back toward the cabin, the weight of the morning settling between them. "You didn't tell them who you are," she observed as they walked. Would it have mattered? She considered that before shaking her head. Probably not. He found himself studying her, searching for any sign that she was holding back, but there was nothing, no curiosity about his wealth, no attempt to pry into his life. It was unsettling. and strangely refreshing. Back at the cabin, Zara unpacked the supplies, moving with practiced ease. Florian lowered himself onto the couch, stretching his injured leg. "You're quiet," she noted, setting a bundle of herbs on the counter. "I'm thinking." "About what?" He hesitated. "How different this place is from what I know." Zara leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "And is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He let out a slow breath. "I haven't decided yet." She watched him for a moment before turning back to her work. "Maybe you don't need to." It was such a simple statement, but it lodged itself in his chest. He had spent his life making decisions, calculating risks, ensuring control over every aspect of his world. But here, in this quiet cabin with a woman who asked for nothing, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to decide. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he wanted to. Florian shifted in his chair on the porch, the evening breeze cool against his skin. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mixing with the distant salt of the ocean. His injured ankle was propped up, wrapped neatly with the bandage Zara had applied that morning. It was healing, but not fast enough for his liking. Zara sat across from him, peeling a mango with slow precision. The golden flesh glistened as she carved it into neat slices, her hands steady. She had a way of moving that was effortless, as if she belonged in every space she occupied. "You'll be able to walk without the cane soon," she said, glancing at his foot before popping a slice of mango into her mouth. "Maybe even make it back to your hotel before they send out a search party." Florian didn't reply immediately. He should have been relieved. He should have been eager to return to his world of meetings and acquisitions. Instead, the thought of leaving sat heavy in his chest. "I suppose I should be grateful," he said finally, "for the hospitality, the patience." Zara watched him, chewing thoughtfully. "You don't seem in a rush to go back," Florian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about that." She set the mango aside, resting her elbows on the table, and he hesitated. He had spent years constructing the life he lived, the empire he had built. Every decision had been calculated, every move intentional. And yet, here in this quiet stretch of the world, he had found something he hadn't realized he was missing. "You live differently than anyone I've ever known," he admitted. "You don't chase things. You don't try to control everything." Zara tilted her head slightly. "And that bothers you?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "It fascinates me," she smiled, but there was something knowing in her gaze. "You're not used to slowing down." "I don't know how," he confessed. Zara leaned back, stretching her legs out in front of her. "Maybe it's not about knowing how. Maybe it's just about letting yourself." Florian considered that, turning the thought over in his mind like a stone in his palm. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the pace. But here, with her, everything had unraveled in a way he hadn't expected. "I don't want to leave," he said quietly, the words surprising even himself. Zara's fingers stilled against the table. "You have a life waiting for you." He met her eyes, something raw and unspoken passing between them. "Maybe I don't want that life anymore." She shook her head, but there was no amusement in it. "You don't mean that." "I do," he insisted. "I've spent years chasing things that never made me feel the way I feel when I'm here, when I'm with you." Zara inhaled, her expression unreadable. "Florian, I know this doesn't make sense," he interrupted, "but nothing has ever made more sense to me." She looked away for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You don't know what you're asking for." "I know exactly what I'm asking for," he said, his jaw tight. "I'm asking for a chance, a real one." She studied him, her expression carefully guarded. "You don't belong in this world, Florian." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Maybe I don't, but I belong with you." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Zara looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't be something you escape to." He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "You're not an escape. You're the first thing in my life that feels real." Her breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might pull away, but she didn't. Instead, she let out a slow, measured exhale before meeting his gaze. "If you stay," she said carefully, "you have to mean it." "I do," he promised, his grip tightening around her fingers. "I've never been more certain of anything." A long pause. Then, slowly, she nodded, and just like that, everything changed. The wind carried the distant sound of waves against the shore as Florian followed Zara along the narrow path leading away from her cabin. His ankle was still sore, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on her, on the way she moved through the world with quiet certainty. She hadn't said much since last night, since he'd told her he wanted to stay. He knew she was thinking, weighing his words against the reality of what it would mean, and he would wait as long as it took for her to believe him. Zara stopped near a small clearing where the trees thinned, revealing a stunning view of the ocean. The horizon stretched endlessly, the water shimmering under the early morning light. She exhaled, tilting her face toward the sun. "You meant what you said," she murmured, her voice thoughtful. Florian stepped beside her. "I did." She glanced at him, searching his face. "I don't want you to wake up one day and regret this." "I won't." She shook her head slightly. "You don't know that, Florian. Your world is built on structure, on calculated risks. This isn't something you can plan." He turned fully toward her, his expression steady. "Maybe that's exactly why I need it." Zara looked away, her hands tightening around the strap of the small bag slung over her shoulder. He could see the hesitation in her, the careful way she was trying to protect herself. "I don't want to be a mistake you make," she admitted. "You won't be," he said, his voice firm, "but you have to trust me." She let out a slow breath before finally meeting his gaze again. There was something vulnerable in her eyes, something unguarded, and then, after a long pause, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. A slow warmth spread through his chest. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear that single word. They stood in silence for a moment before Zara started walking again. Florian followed, his steps lighter despite the lingering ache in his ankle. As they reached the edge of the village, Zara gestured toward a small wooden dock where several fishing boats were moored. "Come on," she said, leading him toward the water. He raised an eyebrow. "You taking me fishing?" She huffed a quiet laugh. "Not exactly. But if you're going to stay, you should see how people live here." Florian followed her down the dock, where an older man was securing a bundle of nets. He looked up as they approached, squinting slightly before nodding in greeting. "Zara," the man said, tying off a thick rope. "And this must be the man you rescued." Florian extended a hand. "Florian Maddox." The old man shook it, his grip strong. "Jonas, you look better than Zara described." Florian glanced at her. "You've been talking about me." "Only when people asked why I suddenly had a house guest," she said, giving him a look. Jonas chuckled. "She doesn't bring many people around." Florian's curiosity deepened, but he didn't press. Instead, he watched as Jonas gestured toward the boat. "You ever been on a fishing trip, city man?" Florian shook his head. "Then you're in for a long morning," Jonas said, grinning. Zara climbed in first, moving with ease. Florian followed, steadying himself as the boat rocked beneath his weight. As they set out onto the water, the conversation was easy, unhurried. Jonas told him about the tides, the best fishing spots, the way storms could roll in without warning. Zara listened with quiet amusement, occasionally glancing at Florian to see how he was adjusting, and to his own surprise, he was. The morning passed in a way that felt unfamiliar to him, not in meetings or negotiations, but in the simple rhythm of a life he had never known. He helped pull in lines, even though he had no idea what he was doing. He listened as Jonas talked about the village, about the people who had lived there for generations, and through it all, Zara was there. By the time they returned to the dock, the sun was higher, the heat settling over them. Florian helped unload the catch, his hands raw but his mind strangely clear. Zara leaned against the dock railing, watching him. "You're not terrible at this," Florian smirked. "High praise," she shrugged. "Just saying you might survive here after all." Something in her tone made him pause. "You're still not convinced." Zara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I just want to be sure you're not trying to fit into something that isn't meant for you." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I'm not trying to fit in, Zara. I'm trying to belong." Her breath hitched just slightly. Jonas called out a farewell before heading toward the village, leaving them alone by the water. Florian reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "Tell me what you need me to do to prove it to you." She hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Stay." He squeezed her hand gently. "I already decided that." Zara exhaled, something shifting in her eyes, and in that moment Florian knew he had found what he hadn't even realized he was searching for, not an escape, not a distraction, but a home. Florian stood at the edge of the dock, the rhythmic crash of the waves filling the silence between him and Zara. The air was thick with the scent of salt and sun-warmed wood, and though the village bustled in the distance, here with her, everything felt like it had narrowed to just the two of them. She had asked him to stay, and he had already decided he would. But staying wasn't just about remaining in this place, it was about building something real with her. Zara ran her fingers over the wooden railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're going to have to tell them eventually." Florian knew exactly who she meant, his company, his board. The world that expected him to return. He had spent years constructing the life they all saw, and now he was about to dismantle it with one choice. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice steady. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "And what if they don't understand? What if they try to pull you back?" Florian reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "They can try, but they won't change my mind." Zara searched his face as if testing the weight of his words. Then she exhaled, nodding slightly. "All right." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. It meant she believed him. Later that evening, after returning to the cabin, Florian pulled out his phone for the first time in days. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls, unread messages, and urgent emails. He ignored all but one. The call rang twice before a sharp voice answered. "Where the hell have you been?" Florian leaned against the porch railing, watching as Zara moved inside, preparing something on the stove. "I had an accident." "I've been recovering." His assistant exhaled, clearly trying to restrain herself. "Do you have any idea how many deals are waiting for your approval?" "I do," Florian said, his tone unreadable, "and I won't be approving them." There was silence on the other end. Then carefully, "What are you saying?" "I'm stepping down." The words were final, absolute. They tasted unfamiliar on his tongue, but the moment they left his mouth, there was no regret. "This isn't some decision you can make overnight," his assistant protested. "You built this company, and now I'm choosing something else." Another pause. "Is this about a woman?" Florian glanced through the open window, where Zara moved easily around her kitchen, completely unaware of the world he was severing himself from. "Yes." His assistant sighed, but there was no anger, just resignation. "Then I hope she's worth it." "She is." The call ended, and Florian set his phone down on the railing. The weight that had sat on his shoulders for years lifted, leaving only clarity in its place. When he stepped inside, Zara glanced up from the counter. That sounded serious. It was. She wiped her hands on a towel, waiting. "I told them I'm leaving the company." Her fingers stilled. "You actually did it." Florian stepped closer, brushing a stray curl from her face. "I told you, Zara, I don't make decisions lightly." Something shifted in her gaze, something warm and unguarded. "So, what now?" He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Now I build a life here, with you." Her breath caught, her fingers curling around his. "You're sure?" He smiled, but it wasn't amusement, it was certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything." Zara studied him for a long moment before letting out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Then she leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. "You're impossible," she murmured. Florian chuckled. "And yet here you are." She laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should be. Months passed, and Florian found himself adjusting to a life he never could have imagined before. He helped rebuild fishing boats, learned to barter at the market, and even picked up a few words in the local dialect. The days were slow, but they were full in a way that boardrooms and skyscrapers had never been. Zara was by his side, guiding him through this new existence with the same quiet confidence that had drawn him in from the start. One evening, as they walked along the shore, Florian pulled something from his pocket, a small, simple ring that he had commissioned from a local craftsman. Zara noticed the shift in his expression before she saw the ring. "What is it?" Florian took her hand, turning her palm upward. Then, without a single doubt in his mind, he placed the ring in it. "I want to marry you." Zara's breath hitched, her fingers closing around the ring as she looked up at him. "Florian, I don't need time to think about it," he said, cutting her off gently. "I know what I want you. Every day for the rest of my life." Her eyes glistened, the ocean breeze ruffling her hair. "You really mean that?" "I do," she exhaled, and then slowly she opened her fingers, revealing the ring once more. "Then put it on me." Florian's chest tightened with something overwhelming, something that felt a lot like fate. He slid the ring onto her finger, and when she looked up at him, he saw everything he had ever wanted reflected back. Zara smiled. "I guess you really are staying." He pulled her close, his voice low as he whispered against her lips, "Forever." And as the waves crashed behind them, sealing their promise in the rhythm of the tide, he knew he had finally found where he belonged.